When was the moment you realized your workplace was toxic? Part 3. When I overheard the president of the company interviewing a candidate and saying, "We're like family here," without also saying, "I'm the son of the owner of the company." When a manager called me a beaner like it was the most casual thing in the world. I knew it was only going to get worse from there. And go figure it did, employee smashing someone else's head in the door. Employee calling someone in another department and whispering a bunch of homophobic stuff about them and their customer, etc. Years ago, I had an IT job that required a review of the previous day's notes. But you were publicly shamed for misspelling a word. Poor grammar. Took too long troubleshooting. Didn't ask enough questions. Etc. Etc. The day one of my friends quit because of an argument over grammar and management was happy for them to be gone really solidified that this might not be the place I wanted to work. I left not too long after that. Stress wasn't worth it. High turnover was always the first sign. My country went into a full lockdown March 2020 because of Corona. So the restaurant I worked at had to close temporarily. However, my boss decided to open up again in May. But I was still temporarily laid off. Asked why and was told they needed me as a backup as they are finding someone better to replace me. I decided to quit in the moment. Got a text from my boss that I was the worst person he had ever met. When they didn't pay us and the excuse was, "Oh yeah, that's 'cause you won't be working here anymore." When I was chewed out by my boss for leaving at 7 p.m. on a Friday after working 12 hours that day to go to a planned dinner with my family. Then the next week I was criticized and demeaned by other supervisors who weren't even mine for not doing enough. Related. There was an expectation for managers to work remotely 2 to 3 hours per day while on vacation. Regardless of the time of year. Yeah, no thanks. When I realized there was no policy in place for dealing with aggressive clients. While regularly intaking aggressive clients. Like. Are we just supposed to let them hit each other? Call the cops on a pair of 8-yos? What? Ain't none of us trained for physical restraints. So legally we can't really do much. I'm glad I don't work there anymore. Mine was. And I've told this story a few times on here. But when after being upskirt at work, 17F the uniform was skirts a kid/young people store, my, late 30s male, manager bought me black lace underwear and gave them to me for Christmas. In front of the entire team. At the staff do. It was tongue-in-cheek. Insinuating it give a future one something to look at. I remember feeling humiliated and sickened. But having to try and save face. I felt like the incident was my fault. After that. I love my job and team and am happy to work in this field and will do anything for them shattered. My eyes opened to illegally long shifts. Being underpaid. Secretly getting us to cover whilst he pretended to be in and paid us cash in hand so the CEO wouldn't find out. We only hire young pretty girls because it's good to encourage shy kids or teens and add to the fun theme. Being far more nefarious and also morally corrupt. More completely inappropriate workplace things. I've thought for 5 years about coming out and talking about the company. It's somewhat well known in the UK. Past employees have said the same and many are still recovering from it years after leaving. But I've always been too afraid and I know too well that many people would still support despite things like this coming out. Years ago I worked at a fast food restaurant for the summer. My manager stole over $15 cash from the restaurant and then went on the run. Turns out he'd been dealing heroin on the side. Had the police show up a couple times asking if he had come by at all. After that my assistant manager was fired and sent to rehab for stealing money out of the register to feed her drug problem. My new boss had me spend half the time helping her to college work while manning the register/grill. She then tried to get me to have sex with her friend, who also worked there, despite the fact that I was dating a girl at the time. She kept pushing me about it and her friend kept making advances for a week. We also had an overweight employee who loved to eat in the middle of our shift. The owners of the fast food place also owned the ice cream parlor next door and we could get free ice cream if we asked for the key. This girl felt she needed it so bad she actually broke into the office and stole the key. When I went with my boss to investigate we found her sitting on the floor of the parlor eating straight out of the bucket of ice cream like a child. She was fired on the spot. On top of that, our best cook may or may not have been illegal, and when he was in a bad mood he would intentionally sabotage/mess with the orders, overcooked mozzarella sticks until they blew up, drop food on the floor, etc. He admitted to doing this often. I worked there for about 2 months before I took a look at it as a whole and realized how insanely toxic it was. But the final straw was when my manager tried to claim she already paid me when she clearly didn't. I had to fight for my last paycheck before quitting. Was in the active duty Navy. I quickly learned that my first 3 years on board a ship were going to be hell when, as I was getting introduced to everyone, I was introduced to a guy in my division who was on restriction. He was going to be out processed after, for attempted suicide. The person showing me around hinted that it was one of our chief petty officers who drove him to do it. Sure enough, got to meet the chief petty officer, and the chief liked to play mind games. He got a kick out of making his junior sailors' lives miserable. I had a job where my girlfriend's mother was my boss. So I guess the moment I realized my workplace was toxic was when my girlfriend cheated on me, and then my girlfriend's mom hired the guy she cheated on me with. In hindsight, probably more than just the workplace was toxic. When I was crying from anxiety about opening up my emails every morning. The day I hired on. It's been a 25-year nightmare. A nightmare with a pension, but a nightmare nonetheless. When our regional manager went on multiple rants over various Zoom calls about how grateful we all needed to be for head office keeping us on the payroll while the COVID shutdown was raging. While I was grateful to have a job, many of my friends lost theirs. It was also insanely stressful as we all had much more work. With fewer resources and staff. Trying to meet pre-COVID metrics. With many of us trying to juggle childcare while working from home. She went on like our company was running some kind of charity keeping us employed while we were all burning out and working insane hours to stay afloat. It wasn't always. I was fortunate to have a boss who took his role as a mentor very seriously. He wanted us to learn, improve, etc. And he was kind about it. He'd reward good work. Correct you when you made a mistake. Yell at you/scold you only when you really deserved it. And would admit when he made a mistake. He retired and left the company in the hands of a dude who was an absolute asshole. Completely the opposite. He wouldn't reward good work if you did something that was 99% perfect. He'd scream and berate you for the 1% that wasn't perfect. The last straw for me was the time I got a new file in. I spent weeks working it up. And prepared a comprehensive letter explaining everything that we were doing. What we planned to do in the future and offering a detailed analysis of the whole thing. Asshole yelled at me because his name should be on the signature line of that letter because your only job is to make me look good. He yelled at me over a bill. Misspelling my very simple name in a follow-up email. I have one of those names that has a common spelling and an accepted but slightly less common spelling like Steven/Steven. He used the wrong one. The next most senior partner reported that he had put the objectionable items into the bill after I had prepared it. Asshole didn't care. I quit. A lot of other people quit. I heard a year later that literally everyone had quit. They hired new people. Including the brother of the next most senior partner. They all quit in less than a year. He lost his biggest client. They had to give up the big suite of offices they built in 2012. Can't say I'm sad to hear any of that. Based on past experiences, when gossip becomes more important than working to the majority of the employees, including bosses. And bosses clearly have established favorites or otherwise let certain employees do as they please daily. The environment is toxic. There are places for socializing and friendship amongst colleagues. But everyday gossip sessions and playing favorites is unprofessional and unproductive. If not downright toxic. I do not miss those aspects of said experiences. When my boss addressed me as fat ass in front of a room full of my co-workers. I once got asked if I wanted a different position. Away from coding. Into project management. I said. Okay. If you help me set it up and give some guidance. The next week I got a project. Through a binder being placed on my desk and the words. This is your project. Good luck. Before I could react. They were out the door. I had a hard time getting projects started. Worked on common sense and some help from co-workers taking pity on me. I made a checklist for software deployments. For instance, but when I told in a rare department meeting that I made such a checklist, I was told sternly not to waste time on stuff I couldn't charge customers with. After the confusing meeting, several co-workers asked me for a copy of the useful list. It still took me some 2 years of working 60+ hours a week to make my way out the door, and got a 65% raise starting the next job. In college I had a part-time job at a big retailer selling appliances. They would generally have a promo of either 0% financing or free delivery. One or the other, but not both. That being said, there was a workaround where we could still give people both. And multiple members of our management team told us that if that was the only way to get the sale, to do it. 2 months later they fired half the department for doing what we were told to do. I quit right after that. Not me, but my brother recently became a manager for a local moving company after working there for less than a year. His entire holiday bonus from the company was a $5 gift card to Starbucks. Thanks for watching.